So, welcome back. Please have a seat, everybody. As mentioned, we switched to English for this panel in order for everybody to understand what's happening here on the stage. Please have a seat. So, welcome back to the last session of this first day of Mobilitars. And I was asking if somebody can translate Città 30, because actually we didn't find an idiomatic expression or something to translate Città 30 in English, but we can use it as a brand. Now, we talked about branding during the day, so Città 30, let's keep it like this. And the road is for everybody, but actually probably the city is for everybody and everyone. And that's the topic we are approaching right now with this last session. I'm very honored now to present the next guests, the next speakers. Some of them are coming from actually all over the world. We have, for example, people coming from Milan, people coming from New York. It's, very, I think, very interesting to have this kind of experience, because what we are trying to do here on this stage in these days is to imagine how will be the future. Because if we think at the future, it's very easy to imagine flying cars probably, or probably not. The question is what we can do today in order to get there, and how to imagine the future of our cities, which are facing actually real problems. Problems like climate change, for example, aging population, and all what we mentioned already today. So the first person I would like to introduce you is somebody who I really appreciate her presence here. She has been the person who changed the face of New York. And when we say New York, for us Italian, it's something very related to an expression. Everybody grew up watching American movies where there was always somebody stepping in a taxi, in a cab, and saying, follow that car. No? There was always cars everywhere. If we think about New York, back in the days, it was always about cars everywhere. Then suddenly, if it happens to you to go to New York, you can see that the city has changed. And has changed not in terms of buildings, because the buildings are still there. So the skyline we imagine, it's still the same, but the road, the streets, they have changed. And there is a person who's behind that. It was the time in which there was Michael Bloomberg was the mayor of the city, and Janette Sadik-Khan was her deputy mayor for mobility. And now she's working for the Bloomberg Associates, and she's going to speak about the future of urban mobility. So, Janette Sadik-Khan, welcome to Bologna. The stage is yours. This is Mobilitars.
Grazie, Paolo. And buonasera. And apologies, my Italian is not good, so we will go in English from here. But as Paolo said, this session is called Building the Future. So I want everyone to close their eyes. Just close your eyes for a minute. And I want you to think about the future of transportation. Just close your eyes. What comes to mind? Okay, you can open them now. If you ask Google, this is the answer that you get. Flying cars and hovering taxis and trains speeding through the air. But if you think about it, these are just more fanciful versions of the transportation that we have today. The flying car is just a car that flies, right? The drone taxi is basically a helicopter with bright lights. And a Hyperloop is, I don't know really what a Hyperloop is, but it appears to be a train that flies in the air through a tube. It's so space-agey. And just like outer space, it's completely uncomplicated by the representation of people anywhere. You see any people in these shots, in these pictures? You can Google the future of transportation and you never see people. Or maybe you see a guy walking his robot dog. And I mean, I know it's supposed to be the future, but if we can't even get a dog that can walk off leash, then driverless cars do not stand a chance. And there's a style about the future, and there's a culture that's built around the future, and all of the benefits that we're supposed to see in the future. We expect the future to look like what we imagined. You know, watching TV in an automatic car, wearing these blue turtlenecks, kind of like a Xanax and chill vibe. But there's another reason why this scene looks so familiar. And that's because we've seen this movie before. This was a version from the 1950s. People sipping cappuccinos in these driverless cars, watching TV. Still no pedestrians in sight. But they are still wearing those blue turtlenecks, the same blue turtlenecks. I don't know about that. We've had 75 years to deliver this version of the future. So why don't our cities look like our transportation dreams? Because the status quo is what you get when you're too busy making other plans. And we may have high hopes for the cities of tomorrow, but we have low expectations for the streets that we have today. And if you drive around the world, streets aren't so different. They're not as different as you might expect. This is Broadway. This is close to City Hall in New York City. And you can see all of these 4 lanes are designed for driving or for parking cars, which is more or less the same design if you travel the streets in downtown Los Angeles or in Singapore. The language of street design by default, doing nothing, is universal. And it's terrible for pedestrians who only get a small slice of the road. This is High Street in London, really more like Low Street. And there's a reason that you don't see any postcards of these kinds of streets. Or King Street in Sydney. You can see the same streets in Pretoria, South Africa. Or right here on Via Cal de Lavoro. This is what passes for street design in most cities. Cars rule the road, and everyone else is on their own, left with the scraps of the street. And generations of traffic engineers have looked at this and said, yeah, this looks just fine. This is exactly how it's supposed to look. If building more roads helped solve traffic, we would have solved it decades ago. But even with 100 million kilometers of roads around the world, people are still stuck in traffic. They are still driving more, and they're spending more money driving. And with all of the space that we've dedicated to cars, all of the signs, all of the signals, all of the markings, they should be the safest places on Earth. But there's no place more dangerous. Traffic deaths are one of the world's top 10 killers, with 1.3 million people dying every year globally in traffic crashes. In Italy, 249,000 people die on average every year. That's one person killed or injured every 2 minutes. 28 people will die during the time we have this session together. 28 people will die. That said, some of the numbers are trending in the right direction. In Italy, fatalities dropped by 42% from 2010 to 2020. But it's still one of the biggest challenges faced by anyone who wants to change cities. And when I first became Transportation Commissioner in 2007, our streets had basically not changed in 75 years. Did anybody watch the movie Jurassic Park? You know how things are like frozen in amber? Those could be a description of the streets of New York City. They were frozen in amber for 75 years. The focus was just filling the potholes, maintaining the 6,000 miles of streets, the 800 bridges, maintaining the largest ferry operation in the United States. We had 5,000 people. But we had the same approach to transportation. This, see those bollards up here? That's what passed for innovative transportation at the time. And so we took a different look. We realized every time you address the street, every time you touch the street, you can make it better. You can make a street that works better in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. You can build the street you want to see. And this is what the street looked like after we touched it, when we redesigned it at Madison Square. How many people have been to New York City? Oh, that's great. How many people have been in the last 10 years? Oh, excellent. The last 5 years? Wow. Our tourism program is working. It's fantastic. So some of you have seen the changes that we've made. We are taking action today to build the city we want to see for tomorrow. And getting more out of your city means looking at your streets differently. There are entire cities that are lost between the lanes. And when you change a street today, you change the idea of what's possible tomorrow. Over the last 15 years, New York City has embarked on one of the world's largest transformations of public space, reclaiming traffic lanes like here in the Bronx, and turning it into a safe space for kids, extending the school itself, and just using paint and the materials that any transportation department has. You don't have to spend millions of euros, and it doesn't have to take decades to do. I looked at our streets as also the rails for our buses. New York City had the largest bus fleet in North America, and we had the slowest bus speeds. My chief engineer used to say that the only way to get across town was to be born there, which is not the mark of a classy city. So with dedicated signals, getting people to pay before they got on the bus, consolidating stops, we built a much faster system, again, almost overnight. And putting design into your public space puts people into your streets. And when you make a street safe for children, you make a street safe for everyone. And by changing the streets, we changed people's expectations of their city. And it was not just a New York story. Of course, one of the most famous examples was Times Square. We reclaimed the space in a matter of weeks. And again, just with paint and planters and markings. And almost overnight, we turned this tangle of traffic into a pedestrian oasis worthy of its name, the crossroads of the world. That part of the story is famous, but here's what you might not have heard. It dramatically reduced traffic injuries. Traffic moved better, there were more people, and there were more sales. It was better for business. And the project followed by a full reconstruction a few years later. But if we had started the traditional way, the traditional planning and studies, we would still be talking about doing this instead of enjoying this space today. And it wasn't just Times Square where we saw this dramatic improvement in the economics and the safety of the street. We found that when we did bike lanes and bus lanes and plazas, safety and retail sales improved. Same thing on 8th Avenue where we built the first protected bike lane in the United States. And you can see the results. Injuries down by more than half, and retail sales increased over 50%. Why? Because cars don't shop. People do. And these investments were less expensive than building new roads and bridges, and were only less than 1% of our total capital budget. And it created the safest streets in 100 years. We saw the same approach that whenever you brought strong design principles to dangerous roads, like here in Mexico City, where we worked with Mayor Mancera on a citywide pedestrian safety program, pedestrian injuries went down 50%. Or in Rio de Janeiro, where we worked with Mayor Paes to fix dangerous streets with interventions that reduced traffic injuries by a quarter. And we saw this in city after city. In Milan, we worked with Mayor Sala and his team, who you'll hear from later today, changing spaces in front of schools and building places for people. And when you see people of different backgrounds, native-born and American and immigrants, boys and girls, men and women, all using the same space, you see a place that supports the life of a city. And it's the kids who were a part of the change, who were a part of the process, working with the city to plan and design and paint the plaza by hand. Over the last 3 years, the mayor of Milan has reclaimed more than 30 spaces for parking and made them places for people. Community places for kids to play, for communities to enjoy. And we saw this again and again. When you give people a choice, they choose better streets. And in less than 3 years, now, 65% of Milanos live within walking distance of a safe street, a bikeable street, a plaza, just to enjoy everything the city has to offer. Every city has a story of transformation, but the good news is that you don't have to start from scratch. We've taken a lot of these lessons and real-world practices and distilled them into a common language and a single source, the Global Street Design Guide, which we translated into Italian just last year, and I encourage you, you can download it, and there are bookmarks on the back. You can download it for free. So I encourage you to take advantage of this amazing guide, which really focuses on flipping the hierarchy of the street from one that puts cars on top to one that puts people first. It's been translated into 5 languages, endorsed by 100 cities, and we hope that cities here and across this region and Italy will join our ranks. So if you're interested, please get in touch with Fabrizio Prati, right here, Fabrizio, and he will help you get that endorsement letter. And today there are so many examples of urban transformation, whether it's here in Paris, which turned the Rue de Rivoli into a bike and bus corridor. Mayor Hidalgo now has plans to build 650 kilometers of new cycling infrastructure. See the same thing in Barcelona, reclaiming spaces for neighborhoods for people to play. Or London, you can see the low traffic neighborhoods where the street is accessible to anyone at any age. And in my work around the world, I'm seeing cities moving in a new direction. Instead of trying to move more cars and building wider roads and highways, they are trying to do more with the infrastructure that they have today. Reclaiming spaces for people in Athens. This central district was overwhelmed with graffiti and cars. And we worked with Mayor Kominis to create a 28-acre pedestrian district just with paint to start. And then when it opened the door in capital construction, it was open to 24 new businesses, 7 new hotels, and led to over 30 million euros in investment. It also saw a 25% increase in storefront occupancy. But temporary tactical elements for streets are only a start. It's one thing to reallocate parking like in Milan and turn it into a space for people with paint and ping pong tables. But you need to make the next step and take it to the next level with permanent materials. Ultimately, building cities for everyone is not a question of engineering. It's really a question of imagination. And I saw it in the face of this young woman, this young girl in Milan. When you put people back to the street, you bring the life and the economic activity back into the city. And with the guidance from this document, and with your commitment and your power and the passion of everyone in this room today, you can change your streets. You can change the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Janette. Thanks for coming here. Thanks for your inspiring presentation. And so I would like to end this presentation with a quote from another very well-known movie. It says, "If I can change and you can change, everybody can change." No? You don't remember? No. Rocky 4, va bene. Okay, well, let's go on. It's time now to move a bit closer to Italy, and from the overview coming from Janette Sadik-Khan, and now we are approaching Italy, as mentioned, with Fabrizio Prati. He's working in New York with the Global Design Cities Initiative, and he will talk about the street for kids. So we are talking about streets for everybody. Now we are focusing on somebody more peculiar than everybody. Welcome, Fabrizio.
Thank you. Grazie. Thank you. Yeah, and thank you, everyone. I'm so grateful to be able to be here and talk about something, a program that is really close to my heart, and something that we're very proud at GDCI, which is the Designing Street for Kids program. And that starts from streets, right? We've been hearing today that streets are the largest continuous network of public spaces in our cities and one of our biggest assets. But unfortunately, what we've been doing for many years, almost a century, is that we're designing them but forgetting about ourselves, about the people, and the most important users, the most vulnerable users, but also the most important user in our cities, which are children. And that brought to a global health crisis, not necessarily the health crisis we're thinking about, but a global health crisis that touches so many different aspects of our lives and touches particularly children. So things like road traffic congestion, air pollution, mental health stresses, and lack of physical activity that is related, directly correlated, we were hearing it in the presentation before this one, to the way we are designing our streets and the way we're designing our cities. The only thing, I'm not going to go into the detail of that, but the only thing that I want to say is like thinking about globally the impact of road traffic fatalities. 500 children die every day in car crashes, and these injuries are globally the first or the leading cause of death for people of ages 5 and 29. And so that's why at GDCI, we started working on looking at what's there, what exists, what are the set of guidance and examples that exist, and putting them together into a publication, which is the Global Street Design Guide that Janette was mentioning before, that has been developed not by our team sitting in an office in New York City, but it was actually by working with a global network of experts from all over the world, from 70 cities and 40 countries. And then we translated that in multiple languages, and I'm so happy that we've been able to translating it also in Italian, and it's now, since last year, available for free to download on our website, and also available for purchase in Italian. And this has been part also of an endorsement campaign that allows cities to actually endorse the guide, and by that create a permission slip, a way for not only the people that work for the cities, the technician, but even general people and population to use those principles and almost demand that these things could be implemented in their cities. And the idea is to flip that pyramid of the priorities that right now, as Janette was mentioning, is putting car first and putting people first. But what I wanted to talk about today is a complement to the Global Street Design Guide, which is Designing Street for Kids, and a publication that focuses on how we can actually design streets and cities by putting ourselves at the perspective, at the height of a child, and really thinking of what are the fundamentals of child-friendly streets, starting by improved and independent mobility and spaces that can be for pause and stay, and really looking at what are the children's needs from the streets in order to define a series of street design strategies that allow us to transform and reinvent our cities, and really changing the streets from a space where children survive to places where actually they can thrive. And this, again, was done by taking inspiration from many international best practices, more than 60 case studies from 28 countries all over the world, and then define how we can actually reimagine streets from places like this to places like this, and really looking at examples that exist and not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but just being able, with a very simple graphic language, to, again, show even neighborhood streets, how they could be reimagined and redesigned, or even intersections to be really places where children can thrive and not just survive. And then we didn't stop there. We just didn't stop with the publication and the guidelines, but we also started to work under a program, the Designing Street for Kids program, and transforming spaces all over the world, from Bogota in Colombia, taking a roundabout that was designed by designing out people and really giving the priority to cars, to a space where actually children can be safe and can thrive. And we didn't stop there. We worked in many, many places. We were seeing the example of Milan with the Piazza Aperte program and many other projects that we had the chance to collaborate with the Comune di Milano, and many other places all over the world, Fortaleza, Brazil, again, looking at how we can transform spaces and really putting children first. And then, very important, using metrics and data to really make the case for those transformations, and looking at all the information we can extract from those street transformations and using them to then inform future projects, but also scale these up into programs and replicating them in different parts of the city. And then, very important aspect of what we do is to create capacity and engage with the communities, and a particular type of community, which is working with children through various engagement tools and methods to be able, at different places, in different situations, to engage kids and really design streets for kids, but designing them with kids, and really asking what they want to see. But by doing that, we have to be warned, because there is a risk of excessive gossiping and lingering and congestion and other big problems like barricades and fist fighting, but the most dangerous of all, which is this impromptu sword fighting that can appear in spaces that are transformed with children. And keeping in mind that when we do that, when we design streets that are good for kids, we're really designing streets that are good for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Fabrizio. Thanks for being here.
Thank you all.
So, Fabrizio, you're Italian, right?
Sono italiano, sì.
Brescia?
Di Brescia, sì, del Lago di Garda.
So, thanks a lot. Well, no, I have a question for you. How would you translate Città 30 in English? Because
30 kilometers an hour cities.
Okay, very good. Città 30 is better.
Città 30 is better.
Thank you, Fabrizio, for being here, for inspiring us with this presentation about streets for kids. And now it's time, as mentioned, we are approaching Italy slowly, and now we are going to Milan. I have to read because I don't remember anything anymore. And we're now going to Milan with Demetrio Scopelliti, who's working at AMAT, Agenzia per la Mobilità, Ambiente e Territorio of the Milan municipality, which will talk about open cities. Actually, it was a typo and a mistake about the title, but we liked it like that. So, Demetrio, welcome again on the stage of Mobilitars. And this is your mic.
Grazie Paolo, thank you very much. And I will try to go, it's very difficult to present after Janette and Fabrizio, but I will try to explain what we did, also thanks to their support here in Milan, starting from a very big framework, but don't be worried about that, it's very short. We live in an era where everything we do to our planet is not reversible anymore. I mean, it's something strong that maybe we should consider every time we work on our cities that are basically the place where we want to live, the cities of opportunity, the places where we look for a job, but also the places where we pollute the most, where most of the solutions and the issues are concerning the Anthropocene and the climate crisis and all the crises that we live. As all the cities around the world, Milan has a vision. Has a vision that, of course, is targeting the next decade. Because, of course, change needs time, and on the other side, it's very comfortable for planners to postpone change to the next decade in order to have someone else doing it. The paradigms that we write in our document we want to change are basically shifting from concepts like consume to reuse to circular economy. We have an issue with colors. We want to transform gray in green, and I think it's not just because I'm colorblind. And we also want to transform the narrative from the city of center and suburbs to a city made of neighborhoods. And of course, in order to do all those things, we have to shift from cars to people, which is easy to say and not so easy to do. Oh well, it should be easier to do. In all this narrative, public space is at the core. Public space is the most of the space that we have as a city administration. It's where we can do change in a very proactive way. No matter if we're talking about planning, if we're talking about mobility, if we're talking about climate, if we're talking about neighborhoods. But public space changed dramatically as well as our lives during the pandemic, not that far ago. And at that moment, we guessed and we wondered if the status quo, the normality we wanted to go back, was really normal or no. And I don't think there is anything normal in this picture, and hopefully it's the common sense in this room, and I think it is. So at that moment, when we were in a crisis, the first reaction that we had was trying to anticipate some of the change, trying to make it happen as fast as possible, because reality is that the crises that we are living are much faster than us, are much faster than our reactions, that our planning for the future are too far away concerning the fact that we have to act now, tomorrow. So the issue is not envisioning not so much envisioning the future. The issue is how we can change the things tomorrow. And the methodology that we have in cities, particularly in Italy, are very slow. The public works are infinite. You can spend your life by having a plaza done, and once you get it done, it's too old. Because administrative processes, bureaucracy, and no matter what you're doing, it's not reversible. So imagine wasting a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of money, millions, into doing something which is old the day you open it. That's why we were interested in trying something new, something different. In doing changes by spending thousands of euros instead of millions, by spending months in order to make it done, to have it done instead of years, and to use a tool which is reversibility, flexibility, in order to convince people that resist to the changes we're going to propose. That methodology is called tactical urbanism. We didn't invent it. We've been stolen from the guerrillas practices, and of course we learned it from Janette and their fantastic team. The tools are the easiest you can imagine. Street marks, the same that you're going to use for define a car parking lot. The same paint, highlight the pedestrian space, show that there is something new coming. You can involve artists and make it also a public art initiative. Then we have to use bollards and curbs, because in Italy in 2023, in Milan, we have to protect people from other people driving cars, which is something we should think about, but it's what's still happening. And then we need street furniture, because we want people to socialize in those public spaces that we reclaim. Activators like the ping pongs that are our flagship element, because we want to win the next Olympics. And volunteers, people that reclaim the space themselves by painting, by carrying the paint cans and to really paint on the ground. Because that moment is the moment where they feel ownership about the new space. And that collaboration is also facilitated through application for community events. Organizing parties is one of the secrets of the program, because if there is anyone that is not convinced about the transformation, maybe if he enjoys his time in a good party, he will change his mind. And then, of course, we monitor public life, because that's the final goal that we want to control and monitor. We want to bring data in order to show that the change is effective. This methodology basically brought us to the development of a program called Piazze Aperte that started 5 years ago. It started with a workshop with Janette and with Fabrizio and with the team of Bloomberg Associates in our city hall, where they tried to teach us how to do quick, light, and cheap implementation. And we started from a place, Piazza d'Ergano. It was a piazza by name, but not by fact, as you can see. In reality, it was a car park for 25 cars that were spending 90% of their time stopped in that place. And what about changing the perspective? We tried, in a few weeks, changing completely the space and organizing one of the best parties I've ever been. And we show to the city that that change was not a matter of investment, it was not a matter of time, it's just a matter of will, political will. And that space is nowadays being confirmed. It's a place made of stone, but it's made after 2 years of experimentations, 2 years of people living the space and negotiating and debating about the fact that that space has to be a piazza and not a parking, by living it and not on paper. And then at a certain point we ended up on an intersection, one of the most common gray intersections that the 20th century, of the 20th century legacy basically. A space where you don't know if a car is moving or where it's going or if it's just parking, because there's so much space and no regulation. They can do whatever. But the issue is that for people, there is that barrier, the pedestrian barrier, we call it, that is containing people not to go on public space. The issue is that this picture is taken from a school, and that actually, if you change the perspective and if you change the mobility pattern without affecting mobility much, you can change the life of the people that use that space every day. And the day we met the schools, we realized that something was going to change, and that our pilots can transform into a program that shifts from top-down to bottom-up practices. So we did an open call for collaboration for projects, and we got 65 proposals by thousands of different actors. And since that moment, we delivered more than 40 projects that are distributed around the whole city, because this is the showcase of the fact that we want to build a city made of neighborhoods, and schools and public space are the heart of the neighborhoods. There are different typologies of interventions. The most interesting are the new plazas or pedestrian spaces, but we are also working to activate existing public space that maybe has no facilities, or to do some small intervention about safety, because as Janette was pointing out, we still have to risk our lives by moving in the city. These are some of the examples. Piazza Sicilia, a useless roundabout that became a fundamental neighborhood space in front of a school, and where every day the community gathers and spend their time. This is one of my favorite, Piazzale Bacone. Have you ever seen a double stop? Why we need a double stop? Why cars need a double stop? Actually, why they need a double stop when we can have a playground where children can play every day and organize their own party at 5 p.m. after the school. And we collected this experience last year in a report that we presented at the presence of the mayor, Mayor Sala, who announces the next step of the project, which is another open call for citizens in order to collaborate with the city on a program called Piazze Aperte for Every School. We did another open call. We gave to the citizens the possibility to participate, and they responded with 87 proposals in 3 months, involving more than 250 schools. 250 is a huge number of schools concerning the whole amount in the city. There are more than 65,000 students interested, and they propose us 90,000 square meters of new pedestrian area, which is a lot, which is a huge demand for change. The same methodology, we actually applied it during the pandemic, also to accelerate some other programs, like the one related to the bike lane. Maybe you ever heard that we tried to make a bike lane in Corso Buenos Aires protected by cars. Maybe you heard because it was on TVs and newspapers for years, and if you want to get famous, try to design a bike lane. And we also did some experiment with the streeteries by giving back public space, also in order to be used by shop owners to facilitate the local economy. So what we learned in these years through this amazing experience is that changing the street, changing the public space is the easiest thing you can do. You don't need investments. You don't need huge amount of money. You don't need years or centuries. You just need the fact that you want to change a perspective and give the space back to people. Maybe you can need a design team. That can be helpful in order to redesign quickly the space, and what we generated in Milan thanks to this program. And you need also to establish a collaborative approach. A collaborative approach among people, among communities, but also a collaborative approach between the city, the administration, the institution, and the people and the communities. Because change is something that we want to do together. And we want to do together with people, and we want to do particularly for the next ones, the ones that are asking us, and we never ask actually them, but they tell us every time we pedestrianize a space that they're going to use it in a different way, in a way we cannot even imagine. Schools are easy wins, and if we wanted to start reclaiming our public space in cities, we should start from schools, because we want to showcase to future generations that there are different ways to live streets and public spaces. Because streets are public spaces, and public spaces have to be designed and conceived for people, not cars. And cars don't build communities. Cars don't shop. People do it. And they also are the ones that will support cities, administrations, advocates, and all the different actors related to this huge topic to fight and fight for change and to ask and be promoter of change. So let's give them voice and not hear that much the noises of the other ones. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Demetrio, for being here and for giving us the perspective from Milan, which is showing a path for all of us, how streets, how roads can change from New York to Milan, for kids, for everybody. Actually, I think it's a good example because if you think about it, we always think about big cities. We are always talking about big cities. And probably big cities are the ones in which things are the most difficult to change. But Italy is not made of big cities. It's made of mainly small and medium-sized cities where people can just gather together and take decisions to change the neighborhood, to talk with the mayor, which is much easier to address than the mayor of a big city, of course, because he is our neighbor, he is somebody we know. And anyway, thanks a lot for the presentation. Now, just for the conclusion of this panel, I have 3 points that I want to underline. And the first one is that Janette talked about the traffic engineering. And let me say that traffic engineering probably was a very bad idea. I mean, how can it be a good idea? Traffic engineering. No? We have created people who were supposed to engineer the traffic, to create something bad. No, it's like having a cholesterol engineer, an heart attack engineer. No? Would you pay somebody to do this kind of work for your body? Probably not. But that's what we did with our city. And so probably we should get rid of these people. Is there any traffic engineer in the hall? Fortunately not. Anyway, you know where I live. And the second point is that if we think about it, traffic engineer was a sub-product of the car industry. No? I mean, the car industry, because I think that it was not underlined enough, the car industry needed something to sell more cars. And so they created a position, somebody who was supposed to work for them. So probably I don't know if you know any shoe producer who can create a kind of engineering for a kind of walking engineer, because actually that's what we need now. Because probably the future mean of transportation after this whole day of work here at Mobilitars are our shoes, which is the most basic thing we can need, or the bicycle, of course. And the third thing is actually something that struck me in the 3 presentations from Janette, from Fabrizio, and from Demetrio, which is we are always thinking about people, which is very good. No? We always say remove cars and get people instead. But there is always something missing, which is like nature. No? I mean, I live in Milan, and what I see is that there is always a lot of asphalt everywhere. We remove cars, we put people instead, but why don't we put trees over there? That's what we need actually now in the days. In the last days, we had a very bad flow here in Emilia-Romagna. And probably one of the reasons, not the only one of course, was that probably we have too much asphalt. No? And we need shadowing for our buildings. So an appeal to the Bloomberg Associates, please, the next time, beautiful, wonderful what you do, consider also the trees, because actually we need it, at least in my neighborhood. So, Demetrio, I live in Milan, you work in Milan, please, more trees in my neighborhood. Okay, enough for English. Thanks for Janette, thanks to Fabrizio, thanks to Janette, and thanks to Demetrio. Applauso. Ok, possiamo dichiarare quindi conclusa questa prima giornata del Mobilitars. Vi ricordo che il Mobilitars però va avanti ancora domani. Alle ore 10 ci troviamo per parlare di educazione alla mobilità con un workshop sul manuale di educazione alla mobilità, parliamo quindi di bambini, parliamo di infrastrutture per la mobilità nuova e parliamo di ecosistema della città, dove affronteremo appunto sulle infrastrutture per la mobilità nuova. Sarà fatto in collaborazione con FIAB, in collaborazione con Legambiente, affronteremo il tema dell'ecosistema della città proprio per concentrarci sui temi della città, non solamente della città delle persone, ma anche delle persone, non solo delle persone. Quindi insomma, grazie mille. Comunicazione di servizio. Qualcuno sa che stiamo lavorando per una festa della bicicletta che si terrà il 3 giugno a Roma. Ci troviamo generalmente tutti i giovedì alle 18:30, facciamo questi meeting online durante i quali ci confrontiamo sulla modalità migliore per far succedere questa cosa. Visto che molti degli organizzatori sono presenti, alle 18:30 il meeting lo facciamo qua e ci connettiamo poi con il resto del gruppo che sta lavorando. Grazie a tutti per l'attenzione per questa giornata, ci vediamo domani mattina.